Welcome to One More Round with Josh Norris. Today I'm very excited to have my friend Bradley Roth with me, founder of Not Most People and host of the Not Most People podcast. Not Most People is a movement, brand, and community that aims to shift the way we think about success while also helping to connect growth-focused, success-minded people who reject mediocrity, groupthink, and following the status quo. Prior to launching Not Most People in 2021, spent years in the fitness business and online marketing industries. Today, lives with his wife Nancy in Scottsdale. Bradley, thank you for coming on and giving some time.
Of course, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So you actually have a very successful podcast. You've been way further along than I am, called Not Most People, and it's cool. I was just listening to one of your episodes and looking at your format. It's very professional. How did you get the idea for all that?
Yeah, it actually goes back quite a ways. I think it was 2018, 2019 when I started to really, I think it was maybe late 2017, I decided to jump off onto my own, start my own marketing agency, one-man agency. Mm-hmm. And of course, doing that, I had to start to learn more about mindset and marketing, of course, and sales and all the stuff that comes with starting your own business. And so going into that world, you come across a lot of just success, mindset, that kind of stuff. And as I was reading into it, I found that more and more of what I was learning from these highly successful people, which growing up, I didn't really know anyone like that, but starting to learn from them, I realized that everything they were saying was very different, or a lot of times the opposite of what I'd been told my whole life would make you successful. And so the thought just came to me one day. It was, and I'm always a very logical person. That's kind of how I think through things. And I said, most people aren't very healthy, most people aren't very wealthy, and most people aren't very happy. So why would I want to think, act, and live like most people, right? So just kind of from a logical standpoint, I'm okay, I think it makes sense to kind of do, you see what most people are doing over here, maybe do the opposite, and this is where the hyper successful people are, right? The standouts and that kind of stuff. So that was kind of the first spark that I had. But then I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. I was I kind of have this concept, I think it's cool, I think it has potential, but at the time, I had built up some Instagram pages just for fun, so I'm maybe I'll make it an Instagram page. And it started to grow, but I realized Instagram didn't have the depth that I wanted, right? Everyone just wants quick hits on Instagram, and then I said, oh, maybe I'll start a YouTube. But I was terrified of being on video and couldn't stand to hear my own voice played back to me. And so for years, I didn't do anything with it. It was just kind of marinating in the back of my mind. I'm maybe one day I'll do something with this. Podcasting wasn't even on the radar, really. As you know, podcasting's kind of blown up more in the last couple of years. So back then it was I thought just Andy and Ed and these other big mega celebrities had podcasts. And then I got into Arte a couple of years ago, and I saw all these people had podcasts. And I was okay, that's kind of interesting. Maybe you don't need to have a huge following and that kind of thing. So I went on one as a guest. I don't know if you know Alex Vonderhaar. He's a big marketing guy in Arte, but I went on to talk about marketing. I was doing stuff with chatbots at the time. It was only a 20-minute episode, but over Zoom. Didn't go very well. And I closed the laptop. I said, I don't know about this podcast thing. And then I got invited onto one more as a guest. And I said, okay, I'll give it one more shot. And this one, an hour plus later, we're having a great time. Kind of hit flow state a little bit almost, and got off that episode. And I said, all right, I think not most people podcasting is going to be where it comes to life. So that was late 2020. I launched the podcast in March of 2021. And the idea was just, I'm going to do this for a couple hours a week for fun and still continue on with what I'm doing with the marketing business. And it just kind of quickly took on a life of its own. I started getting more positive feedback from that in the first month than I had in 2 years with what I was trying to do. So I found myself just gaining energy and spending more and more time on it. And then probably about 6-8 months in, I said, you know what, I think my gut's telling me this is where I need to focus my time. And so it was easy to kind of step away from what I was doing and focus on this. And so I started having that marketing background, really helped into having a good brand and that kind of thing. And again, I had been thinking about it for a few years, so I was very clear on who my listener was and all that kind of stuff. So I had people start asking me, how'd you do it? How do I start one? And that kind of stuff. So I said, maybe I can help some people who don't know what to do, help them get started. So I created a course on how to start a podcast and then a live coaching group. And so that was kind of my first way of like monetizing, I guess, if you will. And then from there, it's just kind of grown, and I started my own community, kind of like an Arte mini, I guess you could think of it that way. Just connecting people, like a paid membership, and then had my first live event last week, which went really well. Got the next one in the works. So it's just kind of, growing and branching from there. But I don't know.
I like because you and I were talking on Monday when I saw you, and it was cool because you were talking about all like these layers that you've added onto it, and I can tell that you had thought about it, like the live event. I mean, I saw pictures you did. I mean, great facility. Obviously, I wasn't there to get the food. I wasn't feeling very good last week, but
Gotcha.
The food and drink and all that stuff. Everybody's having a good time. I happen to know the speaker. And I'm like, gosh, this is a very well professional put together event. Now, did you have to be a part of the Not Most People group to be in that, or can anybody go?
For this one, it was anybody, so it was open to the public. Yeah. So, it's funny because it looked like it all was but it felt like it was all coming together last minute. Like by the skin of my teeth kind of things. But it went well. The next one, we're getting more of a jump on, planning it out more ahead of time. Obviously, you learn a lot from the first one, and so it'll still be open to anyone. But this past one was free, kind of almost like a loss leader, and then the next one I'll probably start doing some tickets, but people in the community get access to the events and that kind of stuff.
So what were a couple of your learning lessons on the first one? Because I've done things too, and I'm like, gosh.
Yeah. I mean, overall, it's funny because my biggest fear my whole life was public speaking. Like growing up, if I had to speak in front of the class or something, I didn't sleep for like a week. I took public speaking in college because I was required to for my major for some reason, and I got like a C, I think, because that was the average of like an A for effort and a F for execution. So definitely not my main gift, so to say. So in the event, it was networking early on, and then I wanted to get up there and kind of give people, like, you kind of know what Not Most People is off the bat by hearing it, but not like in depth. So I wanted to like really get into the history and what it's really about. And so I did my own kind of like 10-15 minute speech or whatever, and had it all planned out. But that was what was, obviously that was my first time on any sort of stage, and so that was obviously a little bit nerve-wracking, and there's things you can improve there. And then once we transitioned to the live podcast part, then I was back in my element. Like that was, I was relaxed. Princeton, obviously, Princeton, he's a great communicator.
Yes.
Made it super easy. So yeah, I mean, other than my part, really, I think it did go really well. Learned a lot in terms of getting sponsors and vendors and all that kind of stuff. So the next one will be at the same place, but bigger and better.
Awesome. Yeah, no, and I'll definitely, if I'm in town, I'll make sure to be there.
Awesome.
Because I love community events like that, especially like a live podcast, because you're hearing people's raw thoughts on questions, which is why I think people enjoy podcasts in general.
Yeah.
Because like we don't do any editing here whatsoever. Well, I shouldn't say that. No, our team does editing, like with some cool pictures and stuff.
Yeah.
But they're not
You're not
chopping up what
the
somebody's
message.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're not chopping up what somebody said and all this stuff. And I think there's something about that authenticity that people look for. I got into podcasts, honestly. I started listening to Brad Lee. I don't know if you know who he is, but oh man,
yeah.
Started listening to that like 3 years ago. Like, this guy's freaking, he's just a cool dude. And he had all these random people on there that were super successful in their own right, but that you would never hear from ever. So that was what intrigued me about it. What intrigued you about the podcasting world? And I mean, obviously it's grown for you, but.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I think naturally I'm a bit of an introvert, but I enjoy connecting with people. Like, I enjoy, whether it's in a group or whether, like, especially one-on-one, I like getting to know people, seeing how I can provide value and that kind of stuff. And so with podcasts, it's like there's so much short form content out there, the TikToks, the Reels, like the real short, quick hits, but I like depth. And so I was like, podcasting, it's listeners have a longer attention span. Joe Rogan, he's the extreme. He does 3-hour episodes. Most of mine are about an hour or so. But I just really enjoyed that. Obviously, the networking aspect is huge. Like, there's been people I've had on the podcast that otherwise I probably wouldn't have been able to have a conversation with, So it's definitely cool, like these people that you look up to, you get to have them on the show and that kind of thing. So, it's not really just one thing, I guess, that kind of spurred it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like you though, because I had a podcast couple years ago, maybe 3, and you know, we did 20 episodes, and it was awesome. But it was like this really produced. I was in a really nice studio, a lot more lights and production, all this stuff, and I enjoyed it. The price point and the time didn't make sense for me to continue that. So I always thought like I wanted to do it again, and it was number one, the meeting people, like in the networking is huge, because it's a platform that who doesn't want to talk about themselves? Most people do, whether they want to admit it or not, right? And then it's just fun, like you. I don't know if I'd call myself an introvert necessarily, but I do like being alone a lot. So maybe I am, you know. And
I'd say I'm more of an ambivert, which is an in-between, where I like my alone time. Like I like being social and connecting with people. I can't, if I go nuts if I'm alone for too long, but also like after an event, I need time to recharge on my own, you know, so it's kind of a little bit of both. But it's interesting because especially I think any good host, you've probably heard podcasts where the host is like talking over the guest and that kind of thing.
Bradley does all the time.
Or Andy Frisella is known for that. So I think a good host is a good listener, and I've always been one to kind of listen more and sit back and ask the questions than to talk. And so it's kind of naturally fit. I'm like, I can have these great people on who have tons to say, and I can kind of like be in my zone of genius with that. Yeah,
totally. The best interviewer like that kind of fits that mold is Tim Ferriss. Ferriss.
Yeah, he's one that I kind of look at and I'm like, you know, because I'm not like a super loud, rah kind of personality, but I can ask really insightful, intelligent questions kind of like he does. So he's one that I look at.
Yeah. I would say, because I started a 4-hour work week year, almost 20, God, it feels like 15, 16, 17 years ago, something like that. Before he had his podcast, and then we started that. I'm like, yes, very insightful, never interrupts, just always got good follow-ups. You know, so were there people like that you thought that you try to mold yourself, or do you just naturally have that sense of how to control a conversation and move it to where you want it?
It's both. Leading up to it, you kind of have those people that you model, right? Like Tim Ferriss is one, but the 2 podcasts I probably listen to the most are Andy and Ed, right? So Andy is like, you know, really intense a lot of times, but his message of real AF is kind of similar to my message, but the style is totally different. My style is more like Ed's. So obviously Ed is a fantastic communicator, world class. And so leading up to me launching my podcast, I would listen to a lot of his guest episodes, and I would kind of just take mental notes of like, here's how he asked that question, here's how he complimented the guests, and here's how he introduced them, and just kind of all these like little cues I was just kind of absorbing. So I think that's super useful to kind of figure out like who, like we would love to be like an Andy, a lot of us, but also like you can't fake it. Like you have to kind of figure out like, okay, who's really doing what fits like what I'm trying to do.
Right. Yeah. No, and Ed Milet, I agree, because he admits to being an introvert. Andy is not an introvert whatsoever, but Ed talks about that a lot, and I think that is why he's such a good question asker. And his was like the next one. It was like Bradley, and in fact, no, it was Ed Milet first, because Bradley was on his podcast, and that's why I started listening. So that's awesome. So you are 70 episodes or something like that in. What can somebody expect when they listen to your podcast, and you said you know who that audience is? Who's a good audience for you?
Yeah, so the tagline for the show is, for those allergic to mediocrity, groupthink, and following the status quo. So if you look at it almost like a Venn diagram, there's the successful side, and then there's the kind of thinking different than the majority side, and then that overlap is not most people, if that makes sense. Yeah. So it's kind of a little bit of like red pill, but then like success and personal development at the same time. You know what I mean? So anyone who's kind of like considers themselves to be an unconventional thinker or think outside the box, or like, I know for me, a big mission of Not Most People has always been to bring together those people, because I know for me, when I started on my like personal development journey, I was like, I don't know anyone who I feel like thinks like I do. You know, it's kind of lonely in the beginning until you build that network and that community. So that's always been a big part of it with like the live events and the community, is trying to bring those people together who are kind of like, man, I feel like no one really gets me, you know?
Totally, yeah. And bring in a bunch of people that nobody gets me
Yeah.
is fun. And it actually reminds, so I just had a friend of mine, Shane Orlando, on, and he was talking about, for him, a personal development thing called Landmark. And it was a 3-day seminar, and person from state, and we're talking like 8 in the morning to 10 o'clock at night, 3 days.
Yeah.
So you're freaking sleep deprived by the end of it, a whole thing.
Yeah.
But all these questions would be asked from stage of, who's super busy, who feels like they have no more time. So they're asking all these questions.
Right.
And everybody obviously feels like, oh, it's just me. And they start looking around, there's 60 other people.
Yeah.
So yeah, building that community that you're building is awesome. And I think it'll thrive because, who wants to be most people? Let's just be honest with you.
Right.
Most people
consciously don't, but they subconsciously kind of fall into that, like the path of least resistance, or kind of what's average. It's easy to settle. Like I associate, like when I say allergic to mediocrity, I think mediocrity comes from people settling. Like no one grows up as a kid and is like, man, I can't wait to live a mediocre life.
Yeah.
Right? And like just get by. But then like we get older, real life hits, and we get like knocked on our ass at some point, right? And then we get back up, get knocked on our ass again, and the cycle just kind of repeats. And then eventually most people get knocked onto their ass and they say, you know what, I don't really like it down here, but I don't really feel like getting up and getting knocked back down again. So I think I'm just gonna kind of stay here. And I think that's what happens to the vast majority of people. And then it's just, those stubborn people, those entrepreneurs who keep getting back up time after time that are not most people.
Totally. It reminds me of the story. You ever hear the one about the gorilla that's in the cage, and they put his food over at the end of the cage? And so like he'd go there, and a month goes by, he'd go and get his food. Well, then they expanded the cage, and they moved it further, and the gorilla starved to death because he was so used to just doing his thing. He was conditioned, and then finally, it's too hard. Yep. And then they sit down, and I think that happens to a lot of people.
Yep.
When you said nobody grows up, on a mediocre. I thought to my one of my first jobs, careers and stuff. Like, I never grew up saying I want to be an account executive for a newspaper company, and knock on doors and sell something I didn't really even believe in.
Right.
But that's one of the things I had to do. But that was like mediocre. So I went into business for myself in 2008, and I was at the newspaper for a year and a half, and it was just one of those things. I can't do this anymore. And my wife and I had a conversation back then. We sold our Jetta, so we had some capital, which she was not happy about because it was like her favorite car. But she was very supportive. But I think about it, and I never would have changed that decision, even though it was really hard next 3-4 years, starting out a business and all that. Otherwise, I'd still be hating my job, and I'd probably be somewhat successful financially, but
you'd be miserable inside.
Oh, it'd be terrible.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I think so many people have trouble viewing things long term. Like people have such a short term window, right? Like you could have taken like the short term comfort and then been miserable long term, but you decided to be like, okay, I'm gonna go through the tough stuff for a few years for hopefully long-term satisfaction, right? And it's that delayed gratification, right? Is this kind of trait that we hear as one of the biggest determinants of people who are successful long-term, is like, can I, suck it up for a few years to enjoy that long-term, so it's like people, I think a big, like most people versus not most people thing is certainty too. Like how much uncertainty can you tolerate for a certain amount of time?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you hit it right on the head, because I think that's what your average majority masses swimming downstream. They're just, but I have certainty. And uncertainty, especially as entrepreneurs, and running businesses and stuff, like, there isn't always that certainty, but it's kind of a fun thing because there's also much higher upside to the things you're doing as well.
Yeah. It's like you kind of have to balance, like there's so much uncertainty for a long time, and some people think that, some people just are born like loving uncertainty. It's like, no, I don't like the uncertainty. Like I would love some more certainty, but I can either take the uncertainty right now, or I can be certain that I'm going to be miserable doing it the other way.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah,
So,
that's a good way to put it.
yeah.
Like I kind of attribute some of it to working out because, and I know you're a workout guy. In fact, that's what your degree is in, right? Exercise science. And when you go to the gym, okay, for me anyway, and I grew up playing football, went to the gym every day at 5 a.m. That's just who I was. I didn't really like it though, but I liked the result.
Yeah.
I liked being better at football. I liked having a decent physique and being strong. So, but then I let myself go, for a while. And then like 4 years ago, I started working out, and I got to working out every day, and I did it for really up until I got sick about 4 months ago.
Yeah.
And people would ask, because it was crazy. I did like 1,000 days in a row or something. It was well more than that. It was like 1,200, but stupid. Nobody should ever do that. But people would ask me. I'm like, well, it's just a habit. Like, do you enjoy it? I said, no. There's been so many times where I didn't want to go to the gym, like that day for whatever reason. It was late or something else. But you build that muscle up, and then like you build that habit, and it just
you become addicted to the end result.
Right.
Right.
So I think if people did more of that and they got addicted to the end result, like you're talking about, that delayed gratification of where they want to go, and okay, here's the habits it's going to take to get there.
Yeah.
That's.
Well, the craziest thing, and I think this is kind of step one, like you want to achieve success in any area, is like you ask the average person, like, what's your compelling future? What's your dream life look like in 5 years? And they're like, well, I probably have a different job, or I have more money, or but it's like super vague and it's not thought out. So it's like if you don't have that planned out, how are you going to get there? It's like getting in the car and driving and then just hoping by chance you end up where you want to be. Yes. Like the chances are slim to none that that's going to happen. So that's like step one that I think most people completely miss, is that they haven't taken the time to, they're like, oh, vision boards and goals or whatever, like I don't need that stuff. One day it's just going to happen for me, right? I'm going to win the lottery or whatever, and my whole life's going to change. But then we see that those few people that those kind of things happen to, they're still just as lost because they haven't taken the time to figure that out. So I think taking the time to really figure out like who you are, what lights you up, gain that self-awareness, and then have that vision that, it's out there in the future. But like you go to the gym and you don't like always sweating and breathing heavy and stuff like that, but like, okay, here's where I'm going to be in the future because of this. Or like we talked about the uncertainty with the business, like, man, this sucks right now, this is not fun, but I know like that future destination that I'm going towards, like that's compelling, that's going to keep me going. And so if you don't have that, it's like, what leverage do you have on yourself to do anything really?
Right. Oh, how did you learn some of that?
How did I what?
How did you learn some of this stuff? Like as far as like, setting goals and having a vision for the future and all that kind of stuff. Any books, any specific mentors?
I'd say one of like the big turning points for me, because again, I grew up, I was kind of one-dimensional. Like I did sports, I worked out, that was like my whole identity. That's what I was known for. Outside of that, I didn't really have much skills or interests or anything like that. So I went to, again, like I kind of discovered the world of entrepreneurship by chance. I was working at the gym part-time. There wasn't a lot of opportunity there to like get more hours, so I got my real estate license. I jumped into network marketing. I knew I couldn't work a regular 9 to 5, so I started just looking at these different things. Those led to me discovering entrepreneurship, and then that naturally kind of led to personal development and psychology. And so I remember I read a Tony Robbins book, Awaken the Giant Within.
Love that.
Great book. Kind of like a primer on just your psychology. I think that should be a required book for everyone.
Yes.
I read that, I think it was 2017, and I highlighted the whole book pretty much. I had like so many light bulb moments about these things that my whole life I couldn't figure out, or I'm like, oh my, that makes so much sense now. And so I was just kind of hooked on this like world of practical psychology. And then I started telling my now wife about it, and she's like, oh, that's cool or whatever. And then we watched this Netflix documentary. I was like, I think I want to go to one of his events. And she's like, I don't know, that sounds kind of nuts. And but she still surprised me for Christmas and got us tickets to his 4-day UPW event out in California. We went to that, and I think that was 2017, and maybe it was 2017, and that just kind of like, that was a pivotal moment. Like from there on out, I was like kind of hooked in that world of that success-minded world, and I was, just from there, I've just been consuming books and podcasts and you name it. And then just spending a lot of time I spent a lot of time in my head, I work alone and or most of the time, and so just a lot of time thinking through these things for the last 5 years to kind of come up with like simplify it down and create these frameworks and logical explanations for things.
Yeah, well, and I love the fact that you went to one of his events. I haven't been to one of his events, but I know the Netflix one you're talking about.
Yeah.
And for me, it was also a Tony Robbins book. It was Unlimited Power, and it was back in and I had read quite a few books prior, but this is like 2002 that specific book, and it was thick.
It's a big book. Yeah.
Like Magic Could Think of Big, Skilled People, like a lot of the books I've been reading, I mean, they were decent sized, but his was like, damn, all right.
Like 600 pages, yeah.
Yeah, but I just poured through that book. I remember the time we lived in an apartment, and I was down at the pool, and I brought the book. I was down there for 5.5 hours, and I was sunburned. I didn't. By the time I was done, but I just couldn't stop.
Yeah.
And he was just so impactful on the stories he told and like the different technology, like NLP was one of his things back in that book, and he didn't really carry on with that in Awaken the Giant, which is an amazing book. But I hear the events are amazing.
Yeah, they're pretty wild. It's definitely changed since COVID. They do it a lot virtual now, which I went to the virtual one like last year, and it's good. I'd still recommend it, but it's not the same. Like being there in person in a stadium with 10,000 people, and like the way that they do events is like, I've been to lots of events in like the entrepreneur motivation space and all that, and it's like there's Tony's event and then there's like every other event, and just the way he puts it on and the emotions that you go through. Like I walked out of there and it was a 4-day event, and it's kind of like what you're talking about with Landmark. It's like 8 a.m. to like midnight, like long days, and you leave there and you're just on like a emotional high for like 6 months. Like it's crazy. Like from the outside it sounds like a cult, and when we got there and we walked in and everyone's like greeting us, like the staff giving us high fives, and my wife's like she's Italian, she's like, this is weird, let's get out of here, like these people are too nice kind of thing. I was like, all right, let's give it a shot. And then like by the end of the day, you're like hugging strangers and all this stuff, but there's so much kind of like that crazy stuff from the outside, but there's also so like he goes really deep with like the kind of that practical psychology and understanding yourself, and you do these different exercises to create that compelling future and figure out what's holding you back and all that kind of stuff. So if you can ever make it, I think he only does like one live event now a year because he's getting older and stuff, but highly recommend it.
Yeah, I definitely will do one in the next couple of years because I don't want to miss that, because it comes down to, as far as the entrepreneur space, motivation, self-help. I mean, Jim Rohn, which is where Tony started learning, and then it was Tony, and like everybody has kind of learned from Tony.
Yeah, everyone's like a sub-branch.
Even like Ed Milet, like they're boys,
Oh yeah, I hear him use Tony's lines all the time.
Oh, one, I didn't realize that Tony had made, he talked Ed into starting his podcast and getting on social media. And I never realized that Ed was not always like this guy, because I've only discovered him. Yeah. And he's like, we're sitting there, and the way I remember the story told was they're sitting in Ed's Idaho home, and they're like out on the freaking bay, and it's like a $25 million home and all this stuff. Yeah. And Tony got into him, like, hey, you need to get on social media, and you're a better speaker than me, and you need to do this, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, and I can only imagine, like, Ed's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He's doing okay. Yeah. But he's like, but if you want to have this impact like you talk about, you need to go do it.
Yeah.
And he did, So no, it's cool. So in the next couple of years, what are some of your goals with Not Most People community?
Man, there's a lot. It's funny, like lately, as I think of one, it's like I think of one thing and then that leads to 3 more. You know, so there's the Not Most People Alliance is kind of the main community I have right now. I don't really consider it a coaching group, more of a place for people to connect, like-minded people. So there's people all over the country. You got some in Asia and Europe and stuff too, which is cool. But just creating that global network for people to connect and find those people who are going to help them level up and that sort of thing. And then from there, apparel, like a Not Most People apparel brand in the near future. I think that has a lot of potential too, and kind of like a lions, not sheep almost. And then from there, in the future, I want to create courses, higher level groups, excursions, like smaller more intimate groups where you go to exotic places. So that, I mean, there's like so much out there that I kind of want to do with, in terms of like, there's the whole event space, then there's the communities, then there's the apparel and stuff also, and also create a spot for like people in that community to like bring them up and highlight them. You know, so like when I do my first Not Most People Summit sometime next year, giving people who are in the community a chance to speak on stage and that kind of stuff. So
I think that's a great thing to do, because you mentioned that public speaking wasn't something that you felt terribly comfortable with. And obviously I wasn't there Friday, but I'm sure you did a great job.
Thank you.
I hated it too when I was younger. Like, I never wanted to get up and talk in front of anybody.
Yeah.
And then, ironically, I did get into network marketing. I got into Amway. And that's kind of where I started my education as far as like self-improvement and all that kind of stuff. But then there was opportunities to speak in public. And then I kind of grew to a certain point where I was running some of the meetings and speaking and all this stuff. And it scared the daylights out of me in the beginning. I remember the first time I stood up and had to like present, and there was only like, I don't know, 60, 70 people in the room. And mouth went dry. I mean, I had everything memorized. I have a board behind me, and I got this like presentation. I got to draw on all this stuff. And then I felt like I just blacked out. Now, fast forward an hour, and I'm done with my presentation. People coming up to me, oh my God, it was so good, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, really? Because I'm sweating. And I thought, you know, and you try to be gracious, but then I'm like, okay, I can get better at this. And then, you know, today it's something I still can improve on, but I don't get that same like, gosh dang, I got to go do this. You know, you get the butterflies. I don't think that ever goes away, but you know, it's such a cool thing to provide that opportunity to people.
For sure. Yeah, it's been a game changer for me. And it kind of reminds me of when I was starting at the gym. Like after college, I had this local CrossFit gym that I wanted to work at so bad. And so I basically harassed the owner. And again, like I couldn't speak in front of more than like 2 people without clamming up. You know what I mean? So he was like, you know, we really want to bring you on. He's like, I know that you are like love it and you know what you're talking about and very knowledgeable, but like we need to see that you can speak in front of a class. And so they kind of brought me through this like shadowing program where I kind of helped out and then gradually started to do more and more of the class. And it took me like a long time, months and months before I was doing my own classes. And even then I was still shaky and quiet or whatever. But 2 years down the road, same thing like you said, like you've just done it so many times, you still get a little bit nervous, but at a certain point, like repetition breeds confidence.
And you know all the nuances too, like the things of where you are pausing or where you're going to correct somebody's workout and all this stuff. So my partners in the IV company, they own Burn It Build It Fitness, and one of the things that they do is they coach their trainers like very hard, in a good way. But John, my partner, so he knows exactly what he wants in a class, and the trainer exactly what they need to deliver, how they need to deliver that message, how they need to correct all this kind of stuff. So he's constantly tweaking, and some trainers just, they don't have the fortitude to take it, and they quit and they leave. But I've met, and I know some of the ones have stuck around with them, and it's like night and day. So I think, you know, when it comes to that kind of stuff, did you have any training? Did you have any coaching, or did you just kind of figure it out on your own of how you wanted the class to be presented?
I mean, I was given pretty much a format, right? You had the warm up, which sometimes I kind of made up off the top of my head. Other times they planned it out. You know, they kind of went through different phases. But there was that. Then the workout, and so it was like I had some structure. But you always kind of put your own flavor on it, right? Like the movements that you go over, you kind of do that in your own way. And so, and you kind of learn like what parts you like and what parts you don't. And over time also it helps when you're in like the same location, you get to know the clientele, and that always helps, you know, make you more comfortable and that kind of stuff too. But I don't know, it probably took me a couple years before I was like really totally comfortable up there. But then even then, that was something I had done 1,000 times. Now going to podcasting and putting out my own content, putting out my voice, not just to like the people in that room, but recording it and putting it out for the world to see, like that's a whole nother step, right? A whole nother level. So that was, again, even after having coached at the gym for so long, I spent years not making content because I was afraid to put my own voice out there.
Which is, to me, and not funny, haha, but you got a good voice. Like, you got a voice people can listen to, and you speak clearly. So I would think like that'd be a confident spot, you know.
It's started to become one, but it took a while to kind of find that, you know. Like, I was always known as, even now, people at the event last Friday came up to my wife and were like, wow, I can't believe Bradley has a podcast. Like, he's not much of a talker. You know what I mean? So there's still kind of like that little bit of identity to overcome. But yeah, again, it comes back to kind of figuring out your style and what works for you and that kind of thing. And it is funny because I used to be like, I don't know, I can't talk. I used to have writer's block, you know, like in high school and college. It was like anything assignment, I was like, I don't really have that much to say. I can't like fill the pages. And now I come on a podcast or whatever, and it's like, I don't shut up,
Yeah,
you know?
right.
So it's kind of like just learning to draw that out and articulate it and that kind of thing. And it's just, it's funny because even just a couple of years ago, I wouldn't have even thought I would have a podcast ever.
Yeah, and now it's like over a year, like a year and a half in, right? And
yeah,
you know, it's gained quite a lot of traction, and you got your own community, and it's. But I think that's just testimony, like stepping out and doing something you're uncomfortable, going back to what we were talking about.
Yeah, and then the live event like 6 months ago, I was like, maybe one day I'll do that, but I didn't think I'd be doing it this soon, or that I would be trying to like speak in front of anyone or anything. So it's just, you know, you keep like moving forward, and things all of a sudden, like, you find yourself in spots that you never thought you would be in.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I think everybody should learn a little bit from that. You know, my other partner is my mentor. Like, he says it in a different way, which I won't say on the podcast. But basically, you got to, you know, grab yourself and go. You know,
Yeah.
Sometimes you just got to get after it, and you know, understand that there's going to be unfamiliarity and uncertainty and you know, emotions that you don't want to go through, but the end result is there, so you just got to figure it out, and eventually you can become good at anything. I believe.
Yeah, that's another kind of like most people thing, is I think most people who, like me growing up, you're like, man, I'm terrified of public speaking, I suck at it. That becomes like a lifetime sentence, you know, whereas I did think that for a long time, but then I put myself into these situations and I started thinking, oh wow, you know, maybe I can change that, or maybe I can improve at that. And so now I've come to believe that, yeah, pretty much anything can be developed as a skill.
Absolutely. And what you tell yourself and what you believe is so important. And in fact, I was talking to Shane about it too. It's like, a lot of people don't, and I don't take the time sometimes to say, okay, what am I really thinking about, you know, these parts of my life, or how I'm doing business and how I manage my day and all this stuff. You don't dissect it.
Yeah.
You probably do, because you were saying you're very internal and you think through all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm very analytical, but I've never been very structured. So like, people say, oh, if I write it in my calendar, if I put it on paper, like, I'll do it. I'm like, I put it on paper, and then I'm like, oh, no, I think I'm going to do this instead. Yeah. You know, so for me, yeah, I spend a lot of time in my head analyzing things in depth, and I know for me that's caused me to, like with the podcast, in November, I said I was going to launch in January, like a year and a half ago, and then it took me until mid-March, because as I get into it, I tend to be a little bit of like a perfectionist and really think everything through, and so like when the product comes out, or same thing with like this event, it comes out solid, like it thought through, but it takes me a little bit longer than some people to get it out there. So again, it just kind of comes back to that self-awareness and understanding that. And so now I'm like, okay, you know, you can keep thinking this through, or like you're gonna have to move forward at some point.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So how can somebody, number one, become part of the community? And then number two, like, are you looking for guests? Who's a good guest that you'd be looking to have on the podcast?
Yeah, so for guests, I'll answer that first. I've been very selective about my guests since the podcast started, and I think that is something that a lot of people, when they start podcasts, they start it and they're like, oh, I need guests, and then they'll put out a post on Facebook, and then everyone who responds, they schedule them out for the next 6 months, and they may or may not kind of fit into what they're looking to do. So I've always been very picky. I've been kind of invite only, like I'll reach out to people and invite them, but I did make it available to apply to be on the show for people who are in the alliance, like in the community. Okay. So that's kind of a little perk, I guess. But really, it's hard to describe, because there's a lot of successful people out there, but I always need to find some sort of kind of unconventional angle to it, right? Like there's people who just are successful, but kind of did it like a traditional way, and I'm like, what's that angle I would find to help people kind of think differently, right? So that's like kind of the common thread I always look for, is like, how can this person bring something unique and different, or how do they do something kind of totally different or outside the box from everyone else in their industry, or that sort of thing, or unconventional. And so that's kind of like, I guess, a vague description of who I'm looking to have.
Makes sense. So you're looking for people that have a little bit of nuance and how they got to where they were at, rather than just that traditional, what you always hear: go to college,
Exactly.
Get a good job, eventually start a company or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, they never say start a company in school, but no, I know exactly what you mean. But people that have kind of taken ulterior ways to get what they're looking for. Okay.
Yeah, or have a unique kind of way of thinking to share and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep.
All right. Well, so you can apply on the website, or I'm sorry, you can join the community. And how much is it right now?
Right now, it's $39 a month or $350 for the year. So I try to make it like super accessible.
Yeah.
I will be probably upping that a little bit in August here soon, but I still want it to be something that, like, again, when I was starting out, I definitely couldn't afford an Arate, $300-400 a month.
Yeah.
So I wanted something that was high level, but also that people starting out who, maybe didn't have a lot of money yet, could still like get around the right people.
Okay.
So that's always been a focus. But yeah, it's notmostpeople.net/alliance.
Okay.
Kind of has all the info, and you can sign up on there and stuff. So just looking to grow that kind of army of not most people and go from there.
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, you guys heard it here. The price is going to go up next month, so sign up now. Join the community. I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, you're not most people. That's just the reality. You got You got different things going on in your life if you're an average person than to listen to this. So
for sure.
Thanks for your time today, man. I appreciate you coming in. Go check it out, guys. I know you got a lot out of this. So please leave a comment for Bradley if you got some questions. Subscribe to the channel, and we will see you next time.